Добро пожаловать в штаб-квартире Бенков.
Welcome to Benkov's headquarters. If UK and Spain suddenly went to war, say because Spain took over Gibraltar, what military options would be on the table? As UK can't really take Gibraltar back, as shown in our previous video, what sort of retaliation could the British do? With Bay of Biscay between them, direct engagement of their land armies is not going to be easy. That also means British advantage in population pool and economy is not going to matter much at first. Even though the difference in military spending is especially evident, actual conventional war capabilities are roughly similar. That's because British defense budget also pays for upkeep of its nuclear arsenal, as well as upkeep of British bases and much greater participation in various missions around the world. Greater cost of salaries in the UK and upkeep of domestic arms and technology base through development of own military systems are also a large factor. Spain lacks most of British power projection assets and would likely just protect its lands. British forces are very much geared for power projection, yet all these numbers mean little to UK. Because operating a long way from home over enemy's home territory is extremely taxing, and even the shown numbers are not enough for it. Even though Spanish northern coast is close enough for much better involvement of Royal Air Force, the overall troops British could land are minuscule in numbers compared to what Spanish forces would be waiting for them. They would have no heavy vehicles, only some light artillery, and even if no losses are encountered during the landings, would be faced with quick reaction from most of the Spanish forces. While British could try and add more forces, adding supplies would take up most transport assets. And Royal Air Force would not be able to do much, with half of their fleet operating at the edge of their combat range, with less time spent over the area, providing support. Even though UK Air Force has a slight edge in technology and training on paper, its overall sortie rates would be lower, meaning less planes present and being outnumbered locally. And Spanish sizable air defenses would further neutralize any chance of RAF providing ample fire support. Such landing would ultimately result in catastrophic losses for the British, and would thus not be attempted. British cruise missiles could be used to hurt the Spanish, but without properly following up with airstrikes, for which greater local numbers are needed than RAF would have, they would not make a lasting impact. Equally so, just spending those missiles on various industrial targets all over Spain as retaliation would do little damage in face of lost Gibraltar. But the British would have more worthwhile options than those. Spain has overseas territories which can't be defended nearly as well. There are Ceuta and Melilla on the Moroccan coast, but getting to either of them means first controlling the Gibraltar Strait, which the Gibraltar video has shown to be impossible. Alternative would be to sail around Africa, but that wouldn't offer much better tactical situation once close to Spain. Both regions are way too close to Spain, so support from Spanish Air Force would prevent any action. There are also the Balearic Islands as well, but they too are too close and are too large to occupy. So the only real way the British non-nuclear forces can strike back at Spain for losing Gibraltar is to go for the Canary Islands. While they are even further from UK than Gibraltar, they are also sufficiently far away from Spain that Spain might have serious issues supporting them. They have a sizable population, and a brigade of Spanish army is stationed there. They are Spain's prized possession. Upon combat in Gibraltar, Spain would likely immediately start reinforcing Canaries. Its several airports would serve them well, when operational. UK would likely start lobbing their cruise missiles ASAP, trying to shut down airports and ports. Spanish would still reinforce by air, using part of their fleet as their transport planes could land on shorter and unprepared runways. Spanish Navy would promptly send most of their assets there. Being closer than the British, they would likely succeed getting a large task force there first. But the problem would be sustaining that force. Commercial cargo ships would need to traverse from Spain to Canaries, and that's where the British ace card could come into play. British have nuclear-fueled submarines, great for being on station for months, operating in the ocean. Still, they would be threatened every time they engage a supply ship as Spanish would use their air forces to protect ships. British surface fleet would have a much harder time engaging the Spanish around the Canaries. The difference in number and quality of ships isn't decisively on British side. When one takes into account Spanish air power operating from land, it would be impossible for UK to achieve supremacy at sea. Britain does operate the Queen Elizabeth carrier, but right now it lacks planes. F-35B has never landed on it. British pilots started training on US ships this year. The carrier would still come very handy to the British. It can house airborne early warning, maritime patrol and anti-submarine helicopters. Aside for their submarines, British anti-ship capabilities are rather limited. Their helicopters have no missiles. Their destroyers aren't fitted with Harpoon missiles. Land-based air forces don't have any specialized missiles. Their best weapon for anti-ship work would likely be laser-guided bombs. Spanish have one small carrier, with somewhat modern planes, which could be devastating against any British helicopter. While they could not endanger British air defense ships such as their Type 45, they could force all remaining British ships to stick together with the Type 45 task force. Most Type 23 frigates have only short-range self-defense systems. If the British somehow could approach the islands with their landing ships, they could hope to unload a decent but very lightly equipped force. Paratroopers and troops brought in by helicopters could boost those numbers a bit, and even deliver some large equipment, such as artillery and supply pallets, as British transport fleet has excess capacity. In the most optimistic scenario, with no Spanish resistance, little under 5,000 combat infantry troops could be brought in, with a few more thousand support troops. But to get more troops would take longer. Britain lacks further paratroopers. An airstrip would have to be secured, so planes could land and disembark fresh troops. A landing ship fleet would need roughly 1 week to deliver another wave of reinforcements, after going back to UK to pick them up. Some helicopters could be refueled between the carrier and the UK, with the carrier then launching new flights to the Canaries, delivering potentially several hundred new troops per day. With Spanish planes landing on dirt strips even if airport runways are temporarily damaged, the Spanish could hope to airlift up to 2,000 troops per day just by air, with little supplies, or half that number with some half-decent supplies and armament. Having access to ports would mean Spanish could use even commercial roll-on roll-off ships, in addition to ones owned by the Navy. In addition to the existing infantry brigade, the Spanish could thus bring in a few more brigades worth of units within a week, with heavier armaments than what the British could land with. Of course, dispersing those forces on 7 major islands means each island would have only half the numbers British could land, if they concentrate their efforts on one island. But none of those numbers would be close to reality. Spanish would be losing their cargo ships occasionally to British submarines. Those submarines would occasionally be found after such attacks and destroyed by the Spanish. British Queen Elizabeth carrier would be hunted by Spanish F-18s with Harpoon missiles. British aircraft trying to approach islands would, before anything else, be met with considerable Spanish air defenses. Bringing in such systems would be the first order of business for the Spanish, even at the cost of leaving some mainland without air defenses. It is thus extremely unlikely British could be bringing in troops by air without suffering unsustainable losses. Approach by sea is equally unlikely, as Spanish aircraft would spot those ships early on and direct fire from afar. So the British don't really have many options to hurt the Spanish. Initially, the first half a year of the war would make it seem as if Spanish are winning. But upkeeping a large force on the Canary Islands, which do not possess the infrastructure for maintaining various heavy and advanced weapon systems, is not possible. So Spain would over time have to rotate much of their force to the mainland for repair and maintenance. And over time, the British would nibble away at Spanish air forces and naval ships, picking out only the opportunities where they can inflict larger losses. The defender would not have the luxury to pick battles, as it would have to keep those islands protected at all times. After 1 year, the British could conceivably inflict twice as high losses to the Spanish. As time goes on, the British could enjoy more advanced missiles, as well as see F-35 reach some war-expedited initial operational capability. They could even return some of the retired and stored Tornado planes to active service. Spain has also less own military products to rely on for a protracted war. Gaining weapons faster from partnerships in various Euro programs could be hindered by UK or neutral countries. While a British landing could still not be successful within a year, the UK could be enjoying a better win-to-loss ratio than Spain. Then, at a certain point during the second year of the war, the British might be able to whittle down Spanish air forces and navy to less of a threat. Eventually, the British might make a successful landing on one of the Canary Islands. After a few tries, that is, as Spanish could still have them initially outgunned and possibly outnumbered. British land forces would suffer greater casualties. Only a very long, protracted war where Britain can rely on full extent of its economic and war industry edge over Spain could yield a result where Spanish forces get cut off and eventually evicted one by one from every island. Taking Canary Islands without too heavy casualties might constitute a clear victory for the UK. Of course, if UK uses its nukes, Spain would be pretty much toast. All major military bases, ports and industrial centers could be destroyed, with millions dead. That option is politically unlikely, even if Britain does lose Gibraltar. Thanks for watching! If you want to help us make more videos, consider becoming our patron. And feel free to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit that bell button for notifications about our future uploads. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.